The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everybody.
Well, Beth, I got to say that it's nice to be back in this studio after a long week and a even longer weekend, it seems.
Yeah, it does seem like it was a long time. We packed a lot of good and bad stuff into the week.
Yeah, well, you mean into the weekend?
Yeah.
Wasn't the greatest weekend.
No.
But we made the best of it.
Right.
And we forgot some of our troubles by having some moonshine and, you know, a pretty good night. Pretty good 2 nights. I think we drowned our sorrows.
We tried anyway.
And when we say it wasn't the best weekend, I guess what we kind of mean is that our cat Tink died. We've had Tink for about 10 years. She was a spectacular cat. Couldn't ask for a better cat. And it just happened unexpectedly. And it was a lot to deal with. So, you know, it's been a little bit hard getting through the weekend.
Yes, it was not pleasant, but here we are, ready to do our episode.
Right. Well, being back in the studio helps keep your mind off things.
Yes.
And we got a good episode tonight.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a castle this week.
Yeah, Belhurst Castle.
Here, right in New York.
There's a few. Not many castles here in New York or the United States, but there's a handful.
Yeah.
And we've been lucky enough to cover a couple of them.
We have. I think there's Bolk Castle. That's in New York too, isn't it?
I believe so.
I've never been there.
But don't hold me to it.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
My memory isn't the greatest. And it's not because of old age. I think it's always been this way. Especially after chemo, it kind of had that brain fog for a long time.
Right.
And I thought it was finally clearing, but now I'm getting older. It's like, well, here we are again, revisiting this.
As long as you remember who I am, we're good.
Yeah, well, I'll remember who you are. I'm pretty sure. Or maybe not. Maybe I'll, wander off and think someone else is my wife.
Oh, that's great. I don't know whether that's sad or whether it's like a threat.
It's pretty inappropriate, I would say.
It's a little inappropriate,
But when you're an old guy, you can get away with that, right?
Well, can you?
Miss? Oh, you're not my wife.
Well, you make me dinner anyway.
Right. Well, like we said, we got an excellent episode lined up for tonight. So sit back, get comfy, and let's get into it.
All right, so Belhurst Castle and Winery on Seneca Lake in Geneva, New York, is a beautiful place to spend a day, especially tasting the various wines they have to offer, like the award-winning Belhurst Estate wines, or their Mabel's Oat Soda craft beers and hard cider. I do like a hard cider.
Yeah, hard ciders are pretty good. I'm not much on beer. Like some wines, but moonshine's the best.
We should have a Where Our Minds Wander moonshine.
That would be awesome. Wouldn't it be great to team up with Mark and Digger from Moonshiners? They're out of Sugarland Distilleries.
Yes, in Tennessee.
Yeah.
We'll have to hit them up with our idea.
We'll tell them we'll promote them. Like they need promotion from us.
Right. Well, Belhurst is also a great place to get married because there's the gorgeous Seneca Lake sparkling in the background. And, of course, there's a real-life castle. For people who live in Europe, and those of you listening to us in Europe, that might not sound like such a big deal, but for us in the U.S., castles aren't exactly easy to come by. Now, to be fair, Belhurst doesn't look like a classic European-style castle, but with its dark brown stone exterior and rounded tower dotted with symmetrical windows, it does look more grand than your average mansion. Inside, there are 11 rooms or chambers to spend the night in, at least in the original house itself. 2 in particular caught my eye. First, the study. Now, obviously, it was once the castle's study, and it's a third-floor room that's been converted into a bedroom. But it still has all of the original woodwork intact as well as stained glass windows. It also has an 18-foot-high ceiling. And then there's the Dwyer Suite, named for Red Dwyer, who we'll tell you about in a bit. The Dwyer Suite also has an 18-foot-high ceiling, stained glass, hand-carved cherry oak trim, and a marble fireplace. There are other buildings on the property where you can spend the night, including the Carriage House and the Vinifera Inn, which is an expansion that was added in 2003. But if you want a truly unique stay, I would recommend the castle itself, especially if you don't mind a few ghostly visitors. Because, of course, the castle is slightly haunted. Now, I say slightly because, unlike other places that we've covered, Belhurst doesn't have a dozen spirits or even a handful, but it does have 2. And the 2 that it has aren't really related to each other in any kind of way, but they are extremely active spirits. What Belhurst also has is a colorful history, including scandals, a speakeasy, and a hermit. So, as usual, I want to share the history of the castle first, since it ties directly into who people think are haunting it. Originally, the land where Belhurst sits was the site of a Seneca Indian village. According to the official Belhurst website, it was the home of the Council of the 6 Nations of the Iroquois. When the 13 original colonies began to take shape, what is now Geneva, New York, was part of the Massachusetts colony. But there was a lot of contention over which colony owned what, since several land grants from England seemed to kind of contradict each other. Eventually, it became part of New York. By 1810, the land was sold to the Ontario Glass Manufacturing Company. It was the first glass company west of Albany, New York. In 1824, the land was divided up among the company's stockholders, and a man named William DeLong got the biggest and best piece, which he immediately sold to another man named Joseph Fellows. Fellows had lived in Geneva for about 4 years at this point, and he was pretty eager to own such a prime spot on the lake. According to klangpearson.no, Fellows had arrived in the U.S. from England when he was just a baby. He was literally born on the boat during the trip. In 1796, when he was just 13, he decided to stay behind in New York while the rest of his family moved on to Pennsylvania. Fellows had an apprenticeship with lawyer Isaac Lewis Kipp. Kip would provide Fellows with room and board and teach him how to be a lawyer. Kip was from a pretty wealthy and influential family, and through him, Fellows met all kinds of other influential people, like Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. He also got to know Colonel Robert Troup, who hired him the second he passed the bar and paid him a salary of $600 a year. Now remember, this was 1803, so that would be about $15,000 in today's money. So, not bad for a brand new young lawyer. Plus, Colonel Troup was the managing officer of the Pulteney Estate, a major land grant firm based in England. And before long, Fellows found himself the head of the office in Geneva, New York. This meant a higher salary of $2,000 a year, a free horse, and a free house. So you can kind of see why this young entrepreneur was pretty happy about scoring the Seneca Lake property in 1824. It was a big boost for his career. He had a simple home built on the land that he called the Hermitage. By 1832, Fellows was the principal agent and director of the entire Pulteney Estates operation, and he was also instrumental in encouraging Norwegian emigrants to come to New York and buy land. So, at this point in Belhurst's history, there wasn't even a castle yet, or even a property named Belhurst, but that was about to change. In 1830, a friend of Joseph Fellows arrived from London, and his name was Mr. Henry Hall. And this is where the legends of Belhurst really begin, because Henry Hall wasn't the man's real name, and there are as many versions of the story about him and his lover Isabella as you can possibly imagine. According to mountainhomemag.com, Henry Hall rented out the Hermitage and lived there all by himself with just a single servant to wait on him. After falling and cutting his leg and refusing treatment, the lonely recluse died of blood poisoning in 1836. This was when concerned neighbors discovered that Henry Hall's real name was William Henry Buck, not to be confused with painter William Henry Buck, that has no E on the end of Buck. So our guy is William Henry Buck, B-U-C-K-E, and the famous painter doesn't have the E on the end. Not the same dude, I soon discovered.
It makes a difference.
It was a little confusing for a few minutes. So I'm going to continue to call him Henry because it would get even more confusing if I didn't. So just keep in mind that's not his real name. Henry had fled from England after embezzling a ton of money from London's Covent Garden Theatre, and he'd married his stepmother, Isabella. She was either a famous actress or an accomplished opera singer. People weren't really sure which. The poor woman had drowned at some point and had haunted the Hermitage ever since. Now, that version's confusing to me because he was said to have lived there all by himself with just a servant, but then all of a sudden there's a stepmother wife that's haunting the place.
Yeah, that one doesn't make sense.
Other versions said that Henry and Isabella were wrongly accused. Henry was both the treasurer and manager of the Covent Garden Theatre, and Isabella performed there. Henry was an honest man, and he was somehow framed. But the most common version is that Henry did indeed steal from the theater, and he and his mistress arrived at the Hermitage in Geneva, knowing that they would most likely get caught. Henry was so worried that he actually had tunnels built underneath the hermitage that led directly to the lake. That way, they could both disappear underground and make it to the water and a waiting boat safely. According to the official Belhurst website, while the couple were actually being pursued, they made it all the way through the tunnels and out to the water. But at the last second, some sort of rogue wave carried them both into the lake, and they both drowned in the icy water. That has to be a heck of a... How do you get a rogue wave on a lake that would wipe you out like that?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I've never seen a rogue wave on the lake.
That's what I'm saying.
Usually it's caused by another boat going by, or...
Right. So that version doesn't really make sense either, is what I'm saying.
I gotcha.
Oh. It's just, you said you have trouble remembering things. I was just trying to make sure you were with me. While author David Sackmeister was researching Henry for his book on Belhurst Castle, he came across a version where Henry had cleverly installed some sort of mechanism in the tunnel that would cause it to collapse behind them on purpose. As the couple fled from their pursuers, Isabella dropped her torch. Henry yelled for her to just leave it, and he pulled the lever. At that second, Isabella stopped and bent down to retrieve the torch, and Henry watched in complete horror as the tunnel collapsed on top of his beloved.
Well, that sounds pretty dramatic.
They're all dramatic.
That would be great for a movie.
It would. Well, it turns out the real story of Henry Hall and Isabella Robinson is much less overdramatic, but it's kind of more interesting. According to mountainhomemag.com, author David Sackmeister was the one that got to the bottom of it all while he was researching his book about Belhurst Castle. Henry was affiliated with the Covent Garden Theatre in London in some sort of way, but there are no records indicating exactly what his ties were. He did steal money from the theater, and he used it to buy 3 tickets for America. One for himself, one for his son, and one for his mistress, the beautiful actress Isabella Robinson. Before they set sail, Henry introduced Isabella to his son as his new stepmother, although there's no record that they were actually ever married. During the long voyage to New York, Henry changed his own name, and he changed his son's name to William Nathaniel Hall. They also met a man named James Simons on the ship, and Simons comes back into the story later. When they arrived in New York, Henry, Isabella, and William Nathaniel made their way to Geneva, where they met their land agent, Joseph Fellows. Now, this part is still a little confusing because it says that Henry was the one who had the hermitage built, whereas other sites that I checked said that it already existed because Fellows had built it. But regardless, the Hall family purchased the land and the house and moved in. For whatever reason, Henry had everything put in Isabella's name. Not long after, for no reason that anybody knew of, Henry boarded up all the windows on the house, and he wouldn't welcome a single visitor to the hermitage except for that fellow traveler he had met aboard the ship, James Simons. And then in 1834, Henry created a trust for both Isabella and William Nathaniel, and he finalized his will. Eventually, creditors did arrive, but because Henry had been smart enough to put everything in Isabella's name, there wasn't anything they could do. But neighbors talk, and pretty soon the Halls found themselves social outcasts. It was around this time that the false rumor began that Henry had dug tunnels from the house to the lake so he could escape from Scotland Yard. So just to be clear, there are no tunnels under the house.
Well, he was pretty smart. He planned ahead.
He did, but there were no tunnels.
Right.
Right.
But he knew the creditors would be coming after him, so at least he moved everything into his wife and child's name.
Right. Yeah, he was smart that way for sure. Now, Henry suffered from all kinds of mental health issues, from paranoia to depression, and he was also prone to fits of rage. During one nasty episode, he chased William Nathaniel around the yard with a cane, trying to hit him. This was when he fell and broke his leg. But due to his paranoia, he refused to see a doctor, and blood poisoning set in. It didn't take long for it to kill him. After Henry's death, James Simons and Isabella sold the Hermitage back to Joseph Fellows, and then the two of them got married. Isabella died at age 44 in 1846. So, she didn't die in the non-existent tunnels, and she didn't die before Henry. She died after Henry. So, like I said, the true story doesn't have all of the overblown romantic elements to it, but I found it a lot more interesting, frankly. Fellows next sold the property to Harrison G. Otis. The Otis family lived there until 1878, and they were the ones who renamed the Hermitage. They called it Belhurst, or Beautiful Forest. In 1877, Mary Otis sold part of the land to the Syracuse, Geneva, and Corning Railroad, with the understanding that she would always have the right of way to the lake. That agreement still stands today.
Well, that could be a little bit scary, too, because you'd always have to cross the tracks to get to the lake.
That's true. I didn't think of that.
And we have that here.
Right.
Going over the railroad tracks to get to one of the beaches here. Small, kind of public-private beach. And they had to build a staircase up over it because they were afraid of people getting hit.
That's true. I didn't think of that. A year later, the United Trust Company took over the entire property, and the house sat unoccupied for 7 years. Locals would still come and picnic on the land, and they now refer to it as Otis Grove. And they whispered that the abandoned house was haunted. According to the official Belhurst website, everything drastically changed in May of 1885 when Mrs. Carrie M. Young Heron arrived in Geneva. She took one look at Otis Grove and Belhurst House, and by the end of the day, she owned it. And we'll get into the rest of the history and the hauntings after this quick break. Hey, did you know? In 1937, Walter Frederick Morrison flung a 5-cent Frisbee Company pie pan at his girlfriend on a California beach. Before long, the couple were having a great time sending the metal pan flying back and forth, until an eager beachgoer offered to buy it for 25 cents. After surviving a World War II POW camp, Walter decided that his impromptu toy, which he called a flying cake pan, could be the next biggest hit in beach toys, and the Wham-O Toy Company agreed. Initially marketed as the Pluto Platter, the plastic flying disc became all the rage. By 1977, Wham-O had changed the name of the toy and sold over 100 million plastic flying discs. In 2010, when Walter Frederick Morrison passed away, his family followed his wishes for cremation and then had his ashes turned into his greatest invention ever, a frisbee. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we're back, and I'm going to delve into more of the history and the ghost stories, so let's jump right in. Carrie Heron moved in immediately, but not with her husband. He stayed behind in New York City. Instead, she brought her manager with her, a man named Captain Lewis Del Collins. I guess it shouldn't be any surprise that Carrie and her husband got divorced pretty quickly, and 13 months after purchasing Belhurst, Carrie and the captain were married. The first thing the new couple did was tear down the old hermitage, and they began construction on the 4-story Belhurst Castle. It took 50 men 4 years to build the massive Richardson Romanesque-style mansion, and the neighbors gossiped from the moment the first stone was laid down. First, there was the rumor that at least one worker had died after he had fallen from the tower. Then there was the rumor that another worker had, quote, gone insane while he was tiling the roof. Now, I would love to know what that meant, but I couldn't find any details about it. So, was he delirious due to heat stroke, or did he actually attack people? We have no way of knowing exactly what it means. But we do know more about the poultry house because it was the talk of the town. No one had ever seen such a thing. Built out of brick, it was also lined entirely inside with plaster, and it had separate cages for every single different type of bird. Nothing was too good for Mrs. Collins' prized Japanese golden pheasants, so of course the glorified chicken coop came with a Furman steam boiler, so her birds were always warm. Of the 3 rumors, the only one that can actually be confirmed as true is the poultry house. There were other outbuildings, of course, like the boathouse that was designed specifically for her 20-person gas-powered yacht. The boathouse later burned down in a fire that allegedly burned for 4 days. The entire project cost $475,000 to build back then in 1887. But strangely, this is when the Isabella stories resurface, but with some new variations. After Belhurst Castle was completed, the story went around that Carrie Collins had invited a beautiful opera singer from Spain to come visit. Her name was Isabella, and she arrived with her lover. When her husband found out that she was staying at Belhurst, he followed her there to take her back home. Isabella and her lover fled into the tunnels, which were now referred to as the wine cellar tunnels, that connected to the carriage house, not the lake. Of course, the tunnel collapsed down upon them before the couple made it out safely. Carrie Collins passed away in 1926, and the castle went to her grandson, who then sold it in 1932 to Cornelius Red Dwyer, the man that one of the castle suites is now named after. Red was quite the character, and Belhurst became quite the place to hang out. First, he continued running illegal whiskey and ale down from Canada and served it in secret at his speakeasy right at Belhurst. But illegal booze wasn't all Belhurst had to offer under Red's ownership. He ran a perfectly legal dinner club that may have been a front for his possibly illegal gambling casino on the castle's upper floor. Red continued to run the gambling casino for 20 years, all the way up to 1952, until the United States Senate Special Committee to investigate crime in interstate commerce convinced him it was a good time to stop.
In other words, the coppers put the pressure on him.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. His dinner club was okay, though, and not considered part of organized crime. So Red continued that up until 1975. But in 1972, an 82-year-old Red was interviewed by the New York Times. As he sat on the front porch of Belhurst Castle, he regaled the reporter with all kinds of tales from his smuggling, gambling, and bootlegging days, including the time he commissioned a New York City detective to go after a prominent New Yorker for owing him $20,000 in gambling debts. The cop was successful. The unnamed important New Yorker paid up. Most surprisingly, Red was never put in jail, even though he never tried to hide what he was doing at Belhurst. He said he simply donated to every political party in Geneva and contributed to every charity that asked him. He was never affiliated with the mob, and yet he could still afford a brand new Cadillac every year since 1931.
So he was raking it in.
He was doing very well for himself. Most of his clients were Sampson Naval Base officers. In 1950, Red built an additional small ranch house on the property that you can rent today. In 1975, Red, who is now 85 years old, sold his beloved castle to Robert and Nancy Golden. The couple continued to operate the restaurant, and over time, they converted the second and third floor rooms into bedrooms. According to the official Belhurst website, Dwayne and Deb Reeder purchased Belhurst in 1992. They turned Red's former ranch house into a rental property and began renting out the castle's ballroom for weddings. In 2003, they were able to build a 30,000 square foot addition that they named the Vinifera Inn. They also purchased the nearby White Springs Manor, a Georgian revival-style home built in 1905. And so Belhurst Castle and Winery has built a reputation as a premier spot for weddings, business meetings, and wine tastings. Edgar's Restaurant, formerly Red's Dinner Club, is gorgeous with all of its woodwork and ornate fireplaces. The 4,400 square foot ballroom is perfect for dining and dancing. But there's also the former music room and solarium spaces for rent. And as we had mentioned earlier, it has 11 rooms, or chambers, inside the castle itself for overnight guests. But there's also a couple of ghosts. And at least one of them has been around since the days of Hermitage. Now, you would assume that Red Dwyer must haunt the castle, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. Well, at least no one has actually seen him. But there are some weird things that happen in the former gambling casino, like the sound of furniture moving around when the room is known to be empty. And according to hauntedrooms.com, guests have reported hearing a woman's voice singing a soft lullaby in the middle of the night, but they can never find the source of the sound. Some have even complained about children laughing and loudly playing in the room next to them, only to be told that there isn't anyone staying in the room next door. And there aren't any children staying in the entire castle. Interestingly, all those reports most often come from pregnant guests. There's also some strange things that happen that feel more like pranks, especially since it's the staff that experiences these things, and luckily not the guests. For example, staff have reported some of the showers turning on and off by themselves in some of the rooms. Glasses and sometimes bottles have been seen flying around the bar. And the most bizarre case, and probably the most prank-like, staff even reported finding a bunch of the tablecloths tied to the chandeliers.
I would just think there was one heck of a party the night before.
That's what I was just thinking.
Great minds think alike.
The ghost believed to be responsible has a name, Dick O'Brien. O'Brien was allegedly the castle's caretaker for many years until his death in 1972, so he would have been there during the good old days of Red Dwyer. Now, I say it's allegedly Dick O'Brien, because I couldn't find any confirmation that there was ever a caretaker by that name, but I also didn't find anything saying that there wasn't. Anyway, O'Brien's apparition is actually seen a lot. He likes to hang out in the restaurant and the hotel bar, so when his spirit is seen, it's either sitting in his favorite chair or walking up the stairs. Sometimes it's just his laughter that's heard in the air, as if he's having a good laugh as he walks out of the room. But the most famous ghost at Belhurst Castle is Isabella, of course. Her life story may be retold a dozen different ways, but her spirit decided to stay behind at the castle. And it's no surprise that Isabella shows herself as a classic lady in white. Her apparition has been seen all over the Belhurst property, both inside and out. Some reports claim that she's frequently seen standing on the shores of Seneca Lake, gazing out over the water. Others have seen her just standing in the front lawn. Occasionally, though, she's allegedly been seen flying through the castle's closed windows. But sometimes on rare occasions, guests have reported seeing not just Isabella, but Henry Hall too. The spectral couple hold hands as they walk across the castle lawn.
You know, with all the different variations of their story, it kind of makes sense that they would be seen as the romantic ghost couple at the castle, even though the stories are not true. It's interesting.
That it is. But I do like the imagery of these two holding hands as they walk across the lawn of the castle. That's just awesome.
It is.
Now, the coolest story to me was one I came across on author Elizabeth Mayette's website. She shared the inspiration behind fellow author David Sackmeister's decision to research and write his book about Belhurst. While staying at the castle, Sackmeister and his wife actually saw the lady in white for themselves. They just happened to be looking out their guest room window, and there she was, a spectral figure standing on the lawn. He knew then that he needed to research the castle and find out her story, and it was Sackmeister who got to the bottom of it. So that's kind of cool because he sounds like our kind of people.
He does. We should invite him over sometime.
Oh, he'd love this place. So there you have it. Belhurst Castle and Winery. A place with colorful history that also happens to be slightly haunted. Although its haunted reputation seems to be getting more attention in recent years. The castle is listed on the Haunted History Trail of New York website, as well as on Backroad Planet's list of top 7 haunted places in New York State. So that's pretty good for a state that includes the Amityville House, Rolling Hills Asylum, and the Morris Jamel Mansion, and the Iron Island Museum, just to name a few.
That is pretty good to be in the top 7, especially when you consider all the places in New York City.
Yeah, it's times like this that makes you proud to be a New Yorker.
The number of haunted places?
That's right.
Okay.
Well, to me, that's pretty good because it's not because of our taxes, because New York State taxes the hell out of us. So, hey, this is something worth bragging about. Come to New York for haunted mansions, but please don't stay because you don't want to pay the taxes here.
Come for the ghosts, leave in the morning.
That's right. Now, the castle doesn't offer ghost tours or anything like that, but they also don't discourage people from openly talking about it. They also don't downplay to its guests who specifically ask about it being haunted. Their focus is just more on the wedding and events side, which it probably should be. And with that said, we had the feeling that Isabel and Henry would probably want it that way.
Well, yeah, they're the romantic ghost couple. They're going to want all kinds of weddings to happen there.
Right. I'd be more like Red. I want to sell illegal whiskey and ale and have a speakeasy and just live it up.
Sounds like he did live it up in that castle. And why wouldn't you if you have a castle?
Why wouldn't you?
I know.
I'm surprised he didn't have a dungeon.
Well, maybe he did. Maybe they just didn't discuss it in any of the websites that we looked at.
I can only imagine what Red would have had going on down there.
In his dungeon?
Yeah. Would have made a great strip club.
Oh, well, A burlesque joint, maybe. Let's keep it cleaner.
That's what I meant, a burlesque club.
Right. Well, you never know.
You don't? Well, I think that about wraps it up for this episode.
Yes, I think so. Good old Belhurst Castle. If you'd like to know more, you can always check our sources in our show notes. We say it every episode, but we mean it. There's lots of information there that we don't always include.
Yeah, there's more to delve into. And speaking of castles, Beth and I found this really cool show on Prime that's called Castle Impossible. And this couple inherited a castle from her grandfather, and they're slowly renovating it, which I think all of you wanderers would probably be interested in, so you should check it out.
Well, they call it a castle, but it's really a chateau. At least the couple refer to it as a chateau. Although it has a moat. So I don't know what the difference is between a castle and a chateau in France.
Well, it has turrets, the slits for people to shoot out. It has a moat. It has a dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
It's just massive. So, like I said, check it out. You may enjoy it as much as we have been.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And they find all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, with that said, that about wraps it up for this episode. So join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you then. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.